Okay, we're getting started. Today we're going to be talking about something that relates to Siman Tzadi Dal Aleph, about time transferring and traveling from place to place. And it starts with Gemara Pesachim. The Gemara, the din is, the pasuk says that a korban pesach needs to be roasted over a fire, and you can't even have it cooked in a pan that itself is over the fire. That's already considered not sli eish. So the Gemara says, because of that, as a result of that, hold on a second, as a result of that, you can't roast the korban pesach on a metal spit. That is to say, is that in a metal spit, the metal gets very hot from the fire. Now the truth is that the part that's near the animal, the part that's inside the carcass, is shielded. The carcass itself blocks the fire from getting to that. But the Gemara says is since part of the metal spit is exposed to the fire, that the part of the spit that's inside the animal also gets hot, and therefore part of the animal is being cooked. Is being roasted by the heat of the metal as opposed to directly from the heat of the fire, and therefore the animal, you're not allowed to roast the korban pesach like that with a metal spit. And because of this rule called cham mitzasik cham kula, if part of it is hot, then the whole thing is hot. Here for a piece of metal, that the part of the spit is hot, then the whole spit is going to be hot, and there's going to be it'll be cooking the korban pesach from the inside. That's what the Gemara says, and that's accepted. That's what the din is for korban pesach. Now that's for korban pesach. That's where the Gemara uses the term cham mitzasik cham kula. Now we switch to our kind of a din about time transferring from place to place. So the general rule is that time only transfers when things are yatz display, right? They have to be the normal way things transfer is through heat. So things need to be yatz display. So now as a machlokes rishonim, does this din of cham mitzasik cham kula work for our din of blias transferring with yatz display also? Which is to say is cham mitzasik cham kula says that it's considered that it's hot. But is that also, so to speak, hot enough that time could transfer also? In the korban pesach, nothing had to transfer. It was just a matter of cooking the korban pesach, that there was heat causing the korban to be cooked. So some are trying to say that it's the same thing. Once it gets hot, then time can transfer also. And that's the second day that the Mechaber brings over here. That says that yes, there's a problem if what the case in the Shulchan Aruch is. We'll get the case in a second. That's the second day of the Mechaber says that there is a problem of cham mitzasik, even for the transfer of time also. Okay, but the first day of the Mechaber, to have somebody live, the first day, I mean, aside from the people logging in, but the first day of the Mechaber says, you sit there anyhow, it's easier for me because of the camera. The first day of the Mechaber, and what the Ramos is passing like is that cham mitzasik does not work. We do not have to be choshesh of cham mitzasik cham kuloi for Indian transfer of time. So for korban pesach we choshesh, but not for Indian transfer of time. Okay, so what's the case that the Mechaber brings to this? The case the Mechaber brings is like this: a person has a spoon, or in my case, I put it a ladle inside of a pot. Okay, so the ladle could be divided into three parts. Okay, the ladle, as far as time, the pot is hot, and the ladle. So the part that I marked number 1, that's the part of the ladle that's inside the pot. That's obviously time transfers from there. So it's a pot of meat, and it's a milchigas ladle. So time, of course, is transferring there, and the time is transferring back and forth, and potentially making basar b'chal. But then there's two other parts to the ladle. Okay, there's the part of the ladle that's inside the over on top of in the pot. That's why I'm label number 2, the yellow one.
Above with the lid of the rim.
Correct, above the lid. It's all, but that's above the pot. And then there's 3, which is outside the pot. It's out of the whole range of the pot over here. So the Pri Chodesh says that section number 2, the part that's above the pot, is not even part of our shaila. That's for sure considered hot because the vapors coming out, the hot steam coming out, the zeh coming out of the pot heats that part up. So what's in section number 2, the part of the ladle that's above the pot is for sure hot. It's physically hot. And therefore, since it's physically hot, it's not part of our shaila of cham mitzasik. The shaila we have, the shaila is, what about the section, what we call section number 3, the part that's outside of the pot, which would be in the person's hand, is that part also considered to be hot Indian time transferring or not? Okay, and to that, the Mechaber has two days, and the Mechaber's Iker day, and the Ramah says we pass them, is we do not say that time transfers, even though we do not say, we do not say Chamut Tasa Chamkula for this day. And therefore, into section number 3, there is no I'm sorry. And therefore, time does not transfer into section number 3. No, time does not transfer from that section number 3 into the pot of food that's being cooked. Okay, well, in our Cheshbon Bittul, well, I'll read you the words. So what we count is we want to decide is the amount of milchig tam coming out of this spoon bottle into the pot. So we say, parts of section 1 and 2 have to be bottle b'shishim. The metal in section number 3, the blias from section number 3, do not have to be bottle. We don't have to worry about those. So we only have to calculate whether from section 1 and 2 are bottle, but not from section 2. Okay, so that's what Arden says over here. So the Pri Megadim and many others ask that l'chari there's a steer to this. Okay, this is our case. It was in Siman Tzadal. For those watching on the screen, you can't see it says Tzadal on the bottom. Okay, but this is our case is the spoon. Okay. He says this, but if you look, there are 2 dinim in Siman Tzadi Beis where it seems to say that we do say that Chamut Tasa Chamkula causes time to transfer, and they are like this. First case is you have a pot of food cooking, and there's a piece of meat that's sticking out of the liquid. Okay, in my picture, it's even sticking out of the pot, but that's not relevant. The point is that there's a piece of meat that's sticking out of the liquid. Okay.
Like green thing's a piece of meat?
It's a piece of chicken. It's supposed to be a piece of chicken.
Oh, okay.
That's what it's supposed to look like, a drumstick. Okay. So it's a piece of meat is sticking out of the pot. It's sticking out of everything else, and some milk falls onto the part that's sticking out. Okay, it didn't fall into the pot; it fell on the outside. And the din is that when you want to decide if the milk is bottled with shishim into the pot, you count everything that's in the pot. Which is to say, is the milk. We don't say the milk is only falling into this piece that's out of the pot. We say the milk fell into the whole pot altogether. It fell into the whole thing. We have the whole thing that's considered it fell into. Okay, that's one case. Okay, so there we're sort of saying now. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that's not like the Pri Chodesh actually, because the Pri Chodesh says that's not even a shayla of Chamut Tasa. Interesting. Okay, let's go to the second case. We'll see here. The second case was you have a pot again, a fleshig pot of cooking. This is the din of tipas chalav. The din is that the milk spilled onto the side of the pot. Okay, it spritzed onto the outside of the pot, and it spritzed into the part where the food is cooking. Okay, so in this pot, it looks like 3/4 of the way up is food is cooking, and the top quarter, let's say, has no food in it, and something spritzed into the part adjacent to where the food is cooking. It's on the outside, but it's spritzed onto that part. So the din is, again, you want a cheshbon, is the milk bottle or not bottle into the meat that was in the pot. You can count not only the places where the food is, but even the higher parts of the pot, the upper parts of the pot are also counted towards the cheshbon, which is to say is that the time, we're assuming the time is spreading to the whole pot. Okay, actually, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that all of this is not like the Pri Chodesh, who said those parts are not even in the Shiloh. Okay, so this is the Pri Megadim and many others ask this kasha, and they say is how come in these cases, in these 2 cases on the right, we say that I'm going to finish my thing in the 2 cases on the right, in the 2 cases in Tzadi Beis, we say that time does transfer, and the case on the left in Siman Tzadi Daled, in our case, we say time does not transfer.
You're saying the Pri Chodesh said that
The Pri Chodesh said
the area above the spoon of the pot would also be included.
That's not even in the Shiloh of
It's only where it's outside of those.
right. The parts that are within the framework of the pot, all those don't even count. They're not part of the Shiloh. It's pasha that's not Chamut Tasa. That they're physically cham, right? And that doesn't even count. So he says that's not, so not like that. Okay. And many people ask this Shiloh. So I'm saying as I'm talking this, I'm realizing that's not like what the Pri Chodesh says.
So clearly, the people asking the Shiloh would include the area of the spoon that is the handle that even though it's above the area of the pot. Right.
Correct. Okay. I'm realizing that's what I'm saying. Okay. So the Pri Megadim tells us there's 2 answers: a Magen Avram and a Shach who answer this question. Okay. The Magen Avram says the difference between the cases is. Excuse me. The difference between the cases, are we trying to figure out if time is spreading? We have the part that's physically hot, and we have the part that's only hot because the din said so, because Cham Mitzvah Cham Kula.
Right.
So in the Magen Avraham says, when the tam is going from the Cham Mitzvah section into the other part, like in our ladle, it's going from the part, this is a milchig spoon, the part of the spoon that's out of the pot is milchigs. Tam going to go from the milchigs into the pot. Let's go into the pot. So that's when we have a question of Cham Mitzvah Cham Kula. But in the case, did I say that backwards?
That's me.
Yes, but I think I'm saying this backwards. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm saying over here. Over here, the tam is transferring out of the spoon. Okay, I'm confused about this. Okay, I'm confused because all the cases, the time is going from here. Okay, I confused myself. Okay.
Well, but those two cases, but this is going to be Miyasha, why those two cases are not like the third case.
Yes.
So in those two cases, we're trying to say that the milchiks is you're saying in that case also it's falling on an area that's
it's from it's spreading
the cool place to where it's warmer.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm confused. Okay. Anyhow, we're going to skip the shach because I'm not sure what I'm saying over here. And the shach. Anyhow, good news for the Jews is that the Supreme Court says we're going to follow the shach. So at least I'm going to tell you what the shach says, and then you'll understand it. Okay. Now the shach. Now that I'm talking more, I'm even realizing I'm answering my other question, which is the shach. Essentially is going to say the same thing that the Pri Chadash said beforehand. That now that we think about it, you'll hear what he says. The shach says is, and Rav Krega says it's so pashut. This is obvious that this is the right answer. The shach says like this. He says. He said, Cham Mitzvah makes no difference whether it's going in or out. It's all the same thing. It makes no difference. So the difference is that in the case in our Tzadi Daled of our spoon that went in, or the case on the left, the Tzadi Daled, the spoon is cold. So the reason to think about whether tam is transferring or not transferring is only because of Cham Mitzvah. The only way that tam can transfer here is because Cham Mitzvah would say, yes, tam transfers into that spot. And we paskin, no, we don't say Cham Mitzvah with Indian tam transferring. But in the other two cases, over there, it's hitting a hot piece of food. Okay, in both of those cases, either it's hitting the piece of meat that's sticking out of the pot, or it's hitting the side of the pot. All these things are boiling hot. The meat, these pots are cooking over the fire. So when it hits those spots, it's not. The reason why time transfers is not because of Cham Mitzvah. So it's not because part is hot spreads the heat to the other spot. It's physically hot. It's physically hot. So if it's hot, of course, time transfers. He says it makes no difference. Okay. Which now that as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that's really what the Pri Chadash says. The Pri Chadash says that spot is really hot. We don't have to, that's not in the shaila of Cham Mitzvah. In fact, that's what the Pri Chadash had said, that area, that higher area, is not part of the shaila of Cham Mitzvah because it's actually physically hot. And the only Cham Mitzvah is in cases where it's not physically hot, where it's just hot because halachically, so to speak, we're calling it hot, but technically we're not actually seeing that it's going to be hot. Okay. So now this nafkaminas of what this, we'll call it just what the shach said, which is like this. One nafkamina is what happens if, in the case of Tzadi Daled, if this milchig spoon that had been put in, instead of it being a cold spoon, we actually put a hot spoon in. Okay, so if you put a hot spoon in, then the shach says, well, if you put in a spoon that's hot, so then of course time is going to transfer all back and forth. Okay, the din of Cham Mitzvah is only when you put a cold spoon in, and then the din has to call it, so to speak, call it hot. But if you put in a spoon that was actually hot, then yes, we say Cham Mitzvah. Okay. The second thing is what happens is if you put in. I think we're going to get to understand the Magen Avraham now. What happens if you put in a cold spoon? Okay, you put in a cold spoon. So according to the shach, there's no tam transferring from the fleshig pot into the top of the spoon. Okay, no tam transfers into over here. According to the Magen Avraham, now I'm remembering what the Magen Avraham said. The Magen Avraham said is tam can't go into the pot through Cham Mitzvah, but tam goes into the spoon through Cham Mitzvah. It goes in that direction. So in these directions, the tam is going into the food, and that it could do. Over here, the tam is going, and the tam over here also goes into the edge of the spoon. But the din was only talking about whether the tam can come out of the spoon. But tam going into the spoon, for sure it does. Okay, tam, even though we're making about Cham Mitzvah, that's to get tam out of the spoon. but to get time into the spoon, we have. So over here also time going into the food, and that we can have chametz. So according to the Magen Avram, this part of the spoon, the part of the spoon that's out, where we didn't say chametz, this part is actually fleshing or treif. This became treif. The only thing the Shulchan Aruch just said was, but don't worry about time coming from here back into the pot because that's not chametz. But this part of the spoon, that edge of the part actually gets hot. It does become treif or fleshings in this case also. Okay. So what would happen now if someone took the edge of that spoon and stuck that into another pot? According to the Magen Avram, this top part of the spoon is treif. If that part is treif and you stick it into another pot, you just ruin your other food. Okay, but according to the Shach, no deal. According to the Shach, nothing happens. This is not part of blias over here because chametz doesn't let time transfer this and that part of the spoon stays kosher. Nothing happens to that part of the spoon. It was unaffected. Okay, and the Pri Megadim says that that's correct. He passes like the Shach, about that din, and says that no time transcends that food. But he throws in, Pri Megadim throws in an extra twist over here. Okay, from someone called the Maram Matz. Okay, and Maram Milt said it, who the Shach is quoting, and Yam Shlomo also quotes as a like a mumchad gadol b'Torah, and he's a big person. I've never heard of him before, but anyhow, and he says like this: even though this top of the spoon doesn't become treif, which is what the Shach says, this part of the spoon does not become treif. Time does not spread from the spoon into the top of the spoon. That's true. Nothing spreads over there. He says, but that's only true if you leave it like this. What happens if while this was cooking, a piece of meat fell onto this part of the spoon? Then it's hot enough, the time does get absorbed into there. Okay, so go figure this. I'm not sure how to wrap my head around this thing. The time does not spread from the spoon into here by itself, but it's, so to speak, hot enough that if something would fall onto it, it could be belay at that part of there also. Okay. So I have some nafkaminas, some applications, if I could use the word of this din chametz. Okay, I'll give you some applications. Try to make it more lemaisa for us if I can, than these kind of pots and pretty pictures. And one is for a filler, which we've been writing about on Mondays. Okay, about fillers. Okay, in a filler, the food passes through some kind of a nozzle and some kind of a section of it. But the filler itself, the filler device is a really big machine, and it's got lots of metal all over the place. So the part where the food passes through, if we fill food hot, then the food goes through hot, and that part where it's hot, of course, is blia. Of course, is blia in that part. What about the parts? What about the parts that are not touching the food? The parts of let's say the nozzle is 6 inches tall, and the food only touches the bottom quarter of an inch, but the top parts of it don't touch anything like that. Okay, so if they actually get hot during production, if during the production they're getting hot, I mean, so much is flowing through that not just a little bit on the bottom gets hot, but the whole top gets hot, then according to the Shach, there's going to be a blia. Okay, there's going to be a blia even into that top part, because the Shach says once if it's actually physically hot, then blia transfers. It makes a difference if it's going in or out. Blia transfers if it's physically hot. Chametz is only when it's not physically or not seeing the physically heat of it. Okay,
according to Magen Avram, though.
According to Magen Avram, it would also become. It would also.
Let's say you have a tray filler, and now you want to use it for kosher.
Right.
So according to Magen Avram, you shouldn't.
It wouldn't come back, right? Because it wouldn't come back in. That's correct. That's correct. Now the second is, what happens if you have a kettle that you know that you only fill the kettle up till I don't know 3/4 of the way up. Okay, and it never goes above that amount. Let's imagine it doesn't go above that part. But lamaisa is whether it goes there or doesn't go, whether the food goes there or not. Of course, it gets hot. Of course, when you're cooking food in there, of course, it's going to get hot on the whole thing. So the Shach, when also according to the Shach, the tam spreads to that part because it is hot. So even without the din of chametz, tam will spread into that higher part. Okay, it's really I forgot to mention this, but it's really a din of pot handles in Sim Tafnanal. You have to kasher pot handles because they're considered to get hot and tam spreads into them. Okay, and the last thing is a case of a ship hold, same kind of a case. We talked about this once a long time ago. In the ship hold, that we're going to talk in a second, I'll mention it again in a second, is the walls that are holding the product. So the hot product is in the tank, and the wall might be very thick. Does time transfer into the full thickness of that wall, or just into the edges where it's touching?
It's not like a jacketed compartment.
Correct.
It is jacketed.
It is not jacketed. No, it's not jacketed.
So how do they keep it warm?
They don't. They at delivery has to be a certain temperature. The product could spend a week in the ocean, so they may keep it warm during the time by running. They have heat coils running through it,
like a steam coil
running through the thing, and then either they keep it warm the whole time, or they just wait towards the end and they heat it up in the last couple of hours or days before they get it in. But then also we would say is with time transfer from the center into the thickness of the metal. If the metal is a few inches thick, well, transfer into the full. And the Shach says is that's chametasi. It does not transfer. Time will not transfer past the parts that are going to be hot. Only the parts that get hot. But if they do get hot, then time does transfer. Okay, then depending on it does not. Okay, now all that we talked about of time transferring with this chametasi possibilities and heat v'chahina, that's only if there's actual heat. But there's another din, coverage k'mevushel, that we say coverage is like it's mevushel. But even though coverage is like it's mevushel, it's only mevushel for the part that's actually touching. So if we have food sitting in a container or in a tanker and it's only 3/4 and it's 3/4 full and it's covered, it's not hot, it's just covered and it's just sitting there. So time only transfers in most cases only up to the section that's submerged that has the liquid touching it. But the part that's higher than that is not, even though we would coverage could become a vushel, you'd say, maybe time should transfer to the higher parts.
Interesting.
Okay.
You can't take by coverage.
Why not? Because if this is like it's hot, then
what's making the, in other words, the logic, I thought, maybe I'm wrong, is that the heat that's in part of it is somehow pushes the time further. But over here, there's no heat to propel it.
Well, but if you said like the Magen Avraham, that time can transfer into the thing,
but still through heat,
through some. Well, but this is kivavush, so it's like it's heat.
I'm saying kavush is not a vehicle.
Okay, so what you'd say is kavush is kivavush, so you might think the kavush is like it's mavush. Okay, but it's not. That's not the truth. It's not. It doesn't go past. Okay. Now two things that are I said beforehand, way beforehand. I'm just going to say it really briefly. One is how far does time transfer? When let's say there is heat, how far can time transfer? I mean, let's say something is very thick or very long. How far can the time transfer? So we talked about this again in Hagol scale, and so the Taz says it doesn't go a merchak rav. Okay, it's a very vague term. It doesn't go very far. Okay, what does very far mean? It doesn't tell you what very far means. So Shechter said he thought very far means half an inch, and that you'd be choshesh for 6 inches. Merchak rav is 6 inches. After that, you don't have to be choshesh for it. Okay, and that would be again in a factory. Think about in a factory, if you have kettles that are connected with pipes, this kettle has a really long pipe from one to the next, over two things that are near each other. Does time transfer through those pipes to the next one over? Okay, and Rav Shechter said, he says, I'll tell you how I know this. I'll tell you right that I'm right. He says he said over from somebody else. That Moshe says that when you have walls of a ship, and the holds are separated by walls, and the walls are 3 feet thick. And Moshe said the time doesn't transfer from one hole to the next hole. And in this one we have kasher, and this one we have treif. Time doesn't transfer through the whole wall. The walls are 3 feet thick. Time doesn't transfer from one to the other. And Shachta said, then the reason is because it only goes 6 inches. So the hole is 3 feet. The wall is 3 feet thick. Time does not go through from one side to the other. Okay, that's it.
How do you go from 6 inches to 3 feet?
No, in other words, it can only go 6 inches.
How do we only 6 inches?
That's what Shechter said. He says this is his idea.
What's the raya? I don't know about the raya.
He has no raya. It's just what he said. He said he thinks really the ikar din would be is only half an inch.
Yeah.
But 6 inches is like how much he's not.
Shechter's bringing a raya.
He's bringing that's such a concept that there's a distance. How far you go? I mean, the Taz says merchak rav. He said Ramesh said 3 feet. It can't go through. So that's because it's too far.
2 feet
that's not a right to the detail of that. Correct. But the truth is that then they asked David Feinstein, he said, no, my father didn't hold us any distance. It goes as far as it wants to. There's no difference. The only thing is, he figured that if the wall is 3 feet thick, it's not going to be hot. And we've been seeing this whole time that if the wall doesn't get hot, then Shach says time doesn't transfer. We don't say we don't say there's time transfer just because it's hot. So it was 3 feet thick. You can come on, 3 feet thick. It's not going to be hot all the way through. Right. He didn't hold there's such a thing that there's a different distance. Or maybe he did, but it wasn't 3 feet, 6 inches or 3 feet are not what he's told, was not the amount is. Maybe Merchak is 50 feet. I don't know, whatever, he didn't say what it is. Okay. Then
isn't it something you can just see if it's hot still?
If it's physically hot.
Yeah.
No. This point is that even if it's hot, No, again, we're not saying it's hot because of Chamuk Tasser. We're making about Chamuk Tasser Chamuk.
Right.
The question, but is it physically? Let's say it physically is hot.
Yeah.
So would the time transfer more than 6 inches?
So
So
I'm saying, so Moshe was talking about a case that
he said it's not getting hot.
It's just,
Right. So then it's to the Shiloh just Chamuk Tasser. Saying we're making
if it would be physically hot,
then his father would have been Machmer.
And Rav Schachter
Is saying no, just 6 inches. It won't go that far. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Then there's also in the dinner of Tipas Cholim talks about time transferring from it fell on one side of the pot, does it spread and doesn't spread? So Rav Schachter could say all those are less than 6 inches. That's not so far-fetched. But there's some sefer who says that time transfers afilu kamet tfachim. Okay, so that sounds like more than 6 inches. I mean, we could talk about how much you think a tefach is, but it sounds like that's more than 6 inches. And there's others later who also give impressions that even it goes really far. Okay, how far is not so, it's a little vague. How far is far? Okay, the next thing is that there's a din which we talked about, I think last time, of if two kalim are touching each other, it makes no difference. They could be hot. No time's going to transfer between them unless there's right there between them. So Rikreger says that if they're screwed together, two kalim are touching each other and they're screwed together, still no time is going to transfer. It's still two different kalim, and the screw that's between them doesn't make them together. But if they're welded together, then they become one kli. Okay, now it becomes like it's one kli. Okay.
And what's the difference?
Because if you're welded, now becomes like one unit. It's like now they're fused together. It's like it's one big cleat. So then if they're all
because a screw is temporary and
because a screw is just a way of holding two things together. They're not really
like a temporary thing. You're saying.
I'm focusing on the temporary. On the there's nothing. They're not when you what makes one pot into one pot anyhow.
It's just another way you could take two pieces of metal. I forgot what it's called. It's a different thing which is permanent. And it's the same idea of the screw. It's just like, we took like these small sticks of metal in between them. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And
no.
That's the way that you can attach two sheets of metal or two things of metal against each other.
So the point here is not that whether it's permanent or temporary. The point is that when it's screwed, it's still, so there's a cleat touching a screw, which is touching another cleat. They're not attached to each other. As opposed to let's say the metal pot itself, what makes it one thing? It's because you melted all the metal together and you formed it into the shape. So that's one. So when you weld it, you're doing the same thing. You're making it into one thing.
So when you do the same, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't see the logic over here. If you're doing the same thing with various, like this thing that I'm describing, it has a similar, to screws, but it's fusing these pieces together.
So I'm not sure what you mean. If it actually touches, if they now became one thing, then it's one thing.
No, okay. It has to do with what you refer to it.
No, is the metal all fused together? And screws are not attached to. They're connected to each other, but they're not fused together. They're still separate pieces. There's pot, and screw. And over here, I suppose when you weld it, it becomes one big thing. Okay, listen to this side of it. Schwartz said, he says it depended. He spoke to a welder, and he says it depends. There's different ways to weld things. You could weld with the bonding material of the weld could be the same metal as what the pots are, or the kalim are, or it could be a different metal. So he said only when it's, or Schwartz said only if it's the same metal. Let's say they're all stainless steel. They're all the same metal. Then it becomes one big cleat. But if the kalim are, let's say, stainless steel and the weld was with nickel, that wouldn't work.
So that's what Schwartz's own finish.
Yeah, this is his own idea after talking to a welder and says that's what makes it one cleat, because now it's all one. It's just a bigger stainless steel cleat. But if we have something in the middle that's some other metal, then that doesn't count. Okay, his own angle. Okay. Last thing is, how quickly does time transfer? So most people would assume that time transfers instantly. You stuck the spoon in, or the milk fell into the pot, you think it falls instantly. Okay, so Pesach Tshuva in Siman Kuf Hey brings from Chamudi Damiel. He brings from a raya from the din of Tipas Chalav. In the din of Tipas Chalav, it talks about if a drop of milk falls in, that's these cases over here, it falls into the pot, then it depends if you were near Vakisa. Did you cover the pot and stir it up or not? That has to do with whether the time transfers or it doesn't transfer. It's a Hanan question. He says, you see over there that it takes time for the bleed to happen because it depends. Did you stir it right away? Did you not stir it? Did you cover it or you didn't cover it? Depends on the time. You see, it's not an instant. There's a time lag. It takes a few seconds. Okay, so that's what he says. The Pesach Tshuva brings this. The Badi Shulchan says no. He says Isav Hetem Pri Megadim says no. It's instant. It's automatically. Okay, things are automatically. He doesn't explain, but probably they're going to say that in the case of Hanan, it's different because you have to have a chaticha. So the Tei Hanan, it has to say it's a chaticha of Isser before, and then the chaticha is Nasas Nevela. And so it takes the time to make this into a chaticha of Isser, as opposed to if it got mixed in, then that things will be different. And they say, in fact, it's instant. He says, if you look, you see in the Hilchos Hagol's Kalim, we have such a concept also, which is how long does it take for tam to come out of a kli when you do Hagolah? Okay, and there also, Poskim say that it happens instantly. Okay, now the Mishnah over there brings that there are those who say otherwise, that you should leave there for a couple of seconds because it takes time. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same thing, because coming out might take longer than going in. You can imagine, might take longer. And maybe that totally is that. But in Badi Shulchan brings from the Pri Megadim that no, things that tam transfers instant. In whatever the case is, whatever we figured out today, of figuring out what cases the time transfers, that happens right away. There's no pause.
Yeah.
Let me turn this off.
That was actually Negea when we were talking about with the trailers.
One second.